There is a pattern in history called the 7 stages of empire. It is a script that has destroyed every superpower in the last 500 years. A British historian studied the rise and fall of empires over 4,000 years of human history. He discovered a terrifying statistical average. The lifespan of a global superpower, from birth to collapse, is almost exactly 250 years. The United States declared independence in 1776. Do the math. 1776 plus 250 is 2026. Here is the terrifying reality that no politician will tell you. The United States is not approaching the cycle. We are deep inside it. We have already completed stage 5. The next stage is the loss of the reserve currency. The final stage is total collapse. This is not a political opinion. This is the autopsy of empires, and the patient is terminal. To understand where we are going, we have to understand the mechanism of the machine. The British historian Sir John Glubb studied empires spanning 4,000 years. He found that regardless of technology or geography, great powers last for roughly 250 years or 10 generations. Why? Because the psychology of each generation shifts in a predictable pattern. But beneath the psychology lies the economics. The 7 stages of imperial death act like a law of physics. Stage 1 is the age of pioneers. A nation is poor but resilient, innovative, and unified by a desire to build. Stage 2 is the age of conquests. The nation expands, absorbs resources, and builds wealth. Stage 3 is the age of commerce. We stop fighting and start trading. This is the golden era. The standard of living explodes. Stage 4 is the age of affluence, the peak. Wealth is assumed. Ambition turns to greed. Stage 5 is the age of intellect and decadence. We stop making things and start arguing over how to divide the pie. The military becomes a massive, expensive weight. Stage 6 is the age of decline. The currency fails. Stage 7 is collapse. The scary part isn't the pattern itself. It's how identical the behavior is right before the end. In every single case we are about to examine, the civilization at stage 5 didn't feel like it was dying, it felt like it was partying. They borrowed money to maintain an illusion of prosperity that the fundamentals could no longer support. We are going to look at 3 specific autopsies: Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union. As you watch this, do not just listen to the history. Look for the mirror. Look for the United States in 16th century Madrid and 20th century London. Let's begin with the empire that owned the world's money, Spain. In the year 1580, Spain wasn't just a country, it was the master of the planet. After Columbus, Spain controlled the Americas. They discovered the Potosi mines in Bolivia, a mountain made of pure silver. For decades, Spanish galleons brought 200 to 400 tons of silver back to Europe every single year. The Spanish real became the world's first global reserve currency. If you wanted to trade in China, India, or Europe, you used Spanish silver. Spain had what every modern government dreams of: unlimited money. And that is exactly what killed them. This brings us to stage 4, the age of affluence and the loss of productivity. Because Spain had unlimited silver, they stopped working. Why build a ship when you can pay the Dutch to build it? Why farm wheat when you can buy it from France? Why manufacture cloth when you can import it from Italy? The Spanish elite came to view manual labor and industry as low status. They became a nation of bureaucrats, soldiers, and priests. The productive capacity of Spain rotted away because the wealth wasn't created, it was extracted. Then came stage 5, military overextension. King Philip II, convinced of his divine right to rule, extended the empire beyond sanity. He was fighting wars in the Netherlands, wars against England, wars against the Ottomans, wars in Italy, and wars in the Americas, all at the same time. It cost a fortune to maintain an army on 4 continents. Despite owning all the silver in the world, Spain began to run a deficit. They were spending more than they were stealing. So they entered stage 6, currency debasement. This is the smoking gun. When the taxes weren't enough to pay for the wars, the Spanish crown began to cheat. They took the silver coins and mixed them with copper. They called it vellon. At first, it was 90% silver, then 50%. Then it was almost pure copper, but the government insisted it had the same value. The markets disagreed. Inflation exploded. The price of bread in Madrid skyrocketed. The silver, the real money, flowed out of Spain to pay for imports, leaving the Spanish people holding worthless copper coins. Between 1557 and 1596, Spain, the richest empire in history, declared bankruptcy 4 times. By 1640, the collapse was undeniable. Spain lost Portugal. They lost the Netherlands. The greatest power on earth was reduced to a second-rate regional player, bleeding from self-inflicted economic wounds. They assumed their reserve currency status would save them. Instead, it allowed them to dig a hole so deep they never climbed out. Fast forward 300 years. The location changes, but the script remains identical. In 1914, the British Empire covered 25% of the Earth's land surface. The pound sterling was as good as gold. In fact, it was the gold standard. London was the banker to the world. But Britain had already entered stage 5, overextension. They were policing India, Africa, the Middle East, and the high seas. The cost of maintaining this global policeman status was eating them alive. Then World War I hit. To fight the war, Britain didn't just spend their income, they spent their future. They borrowed billions from the United States. In 4 years of war, Britain transformed from the world's creditor, everyone owed them money, to the world's debtor, they owed everyone money. But the real collapse didn't happen on the battlefield. It happened in the central bank. After the war, Britain tried to pretend nothing had changed. They tried to return the pound to the gold standard at the pre-war rate in 1925. It was an act of ego. The mathematics didn't support it. Britain didn't have the gold anymore. They had shipped it all to America to buy bullets. This crushed their economy. Exports became too expensive. Factories closed. The Great Depression hit Britain a decade before it hit America. Then came stage 6, the loss of confidence. In 1931, the reality check arrived. The market realized Britain didn't have the gold. A run on the pound began. The Bank of England was forced to default on the gold standard. Overnight, the pound lost 25% of its value. The final nail in the coffin was World War II. By 1945, Britain was technically victorious, but financially dead. They owed the US and Canada over $30 billion. In a humiliating turn of events, the United States forced Britain to dismantle their empire in exchange for loans. In 1956, during the Suez Crisis, when Britain tried to assert military power in Egypt, the United States threatened to crash the British pound by selling off their sterling bonds. Britain backed down. In that moment, the world saw the truth. The empire was gone. The pound was just a local currency. The superpower had become a museum piece. They went from ruling the waves to being America's junior partner in less than 40 years. Why? Because they prioritized military dominance over economic solvency until the math forced them to their needs. Now let's look at the most recent corpse, the Soviet Union. If Spain died from wealth extraction and Britain died from debt, the USSR died from allocation failure. From 1945 to 1980, the Soviet Union terrified the West. They beat America to space, they had more tanks, more artillery, and a sphere of influence that covered Eastern Europe, Asia, and parts of Africa. But this was a Potemkin village superpower, a facade. The USSR was allocating between 15 and 20% of its entire GDP to the military. For context, the US spends about 3.5% today. The Soviets were starving their productive economy to feed their war machine. They entered stage 5 early. While they were building nuclear submarines, their citizens were waiting 6 hours in line for toilet paper. They had brilliant physicists but couldn't manufacture a decent pair of blue jeans. The rot accelerated in the 1980s due to 2 factors. 1, imperial overstretch. The invasion of Afghanistan became their Vietnam, a money pit they couldn't win. And 2, resource dependency. The Soviet economy wasn't productive. It relied on high oil prices. When oil prices crashed in the mid-80s, the checkbook ran dry. They tried to print money to cover the gaps. The ruble was officially pegged to the dollar at an artificial rate, but on the black market, the real market, it was worthless. Nobody wanted rubles. They wanted Levi's jeans and Marlboro cigarettes. The currency had zero trust.
Then came the speed of stage 7. People think empires decline slowly. They don't. They decline slowly, then collapse suddenly. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. In 1990, the satellite states declared independence. In December 1991, the Soviet Union was dissolved. It took less than 900 days for a global superpower to cease existing. There was no foreign invasion. The system simply imploded under the weight of its own bad math. They promised everything, could afford nothing, and when the people realized the money was fake, the power evaporated overnight. Spain, Britain, the USSR. 3 different centuries, 3 different economic systems. The exact same pattern. 1. Military overextension. 2. Loss of productive capacity. 3. Unpayable debt. 4. Currency debasement. 5. Collapse. Now, take a deep breath. Let's look at the United States in 2025. Checkpoint 1. Military overextension. The US maintains 750 military bases in 80 countries. We are funding a proxy war in Eastern Europe, defending shipping lanes in the Middle East, and preparing for conflict in the Pacific. Our defense budget is nearly $900 billion a year, more than the next 10 nations combined. We are Rome, stretched to the breaking point, policing borders thousands of miles from home, while our own borders are in chaos. Checkpoint 2. Loss of productive capacity. Just like Spain in the 1600s, America has financialized its economy. We don't make things, we finance things. Since the year 2000, we have lost over 5 million manufacturing jobs. We are dependent on our geopolitical rival, China, for antibiotics, steel, electronics, and the components of our own weapon systems. We are a consumer economy that imports wealth and exports debt. Checkpoint 3. The debt spiral. This is the most damning indicator. The US national debt is $36 trillion and climbing by $1 trillion every 100 days. But the debt number isn't the scary part. The scary part is the interest. In 2024, the US government spent more on interest payments on the debt than it spent on the entire military. We are borrowing money just to pay the interest on the money we already borrowed. That is the definition of a Ponzi scheme. Checkpoint 4. Currency debasement. In 1971, President Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. Since then, the dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power against gold. But look at the last 4 years. Since 2020, we have printed nearly 40% of all US dollars in existence. Remember the Spanish mixing copper into their silver? We're doing the digital equivalent. We are diluting the money supply to pay for government incompetence. The result is the inflation you feel at the grocery store. That isn't prices going up. That is the value of your money going down. We are firmly in stage 5, decadence and decline. We have the internal social rot, the polarization, the loss of trust in institutions, the belief that we are too big to fail. But the final domino hasn't fallen yet. That is stage 6, the loss of the reserve currency. This is what you need to watch. This is the moment the music stops. Right now, the only reason the US can run a $36 trillion deficit is that the world uses dollars to trade oil. They have to hold our debt. But look at the headlines. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now Saudi Arabia, are actively building a payment system to bypass the dollar. Central banks around the world are buying gold at record paces, the fastest rate in 50 years. They are dumping treasuries. They know what's coming. When the world stops needing dollars to buy oil, all those trillions of dollars currently held overseas will come flooding back to the US. The result? Hyperinflation that makes 2022 look like a joke, interest rates soaring to 20%, the collapse of the federal budget. There is a concept in crisis management called the gray rhino. A black swan is a disaster you couldn't predict, like an asteroid impact. A gray rhino is a massive 2-ton threat that is standing right in front of you, charging at you, but you refuse to move because moving is uncomfortable. The collapse of the American empire is a gray rhino. The math is public. The debt is public. The history is written. Spain didn't think it would happen. Britain didn't think it would happen. The Soviets didn't think it would happen. Are we arrogant enough to believe that for the first time in human history, the laws of economics don't apply to us? We are at stage 5. The transition to stage 6 usually happens fast. It happens when a bond option fails. It happens when a war expands beyond our budget. It happens when confidence snaps. Does this mean it's the end of the world? No. Spain is still there. Britain is still there. They are nice places to visit, but they are not empires. The standard of living for the average citizen plummeted during the transition. The savings of the middle class were wiped out. The global influence vanished. The next 10 years will determine whether the United States manages a graceful decline into a regional power or a catastrophic collapse like the Soviet Union. If you are watching this, you cannot stop the macro cycle. You cannot fix the national debt. You cannot reindustrialize the country overnight. But you can prepare. You can understand that the money in your bank account is melting ice. You can understand that the promises made by politicians are mathematically impossible to keep. You can understand that history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. The pattern has destroyed 3 superpowers in 500 years. The 4th is teetering on the edge. The only question left is, when the stage curtain falls, where will you be standing?
I'm going to document every step of the decline right here. If you want to survive the crash, you need to see it coming. Subscribe. Class is in session, and the final exam is approaching.